Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder why sometimes you just can't switch gears and do what you need to do even when you know you should? This new study dives deep into how our brains manage conflicting impulses. The central question here is all about how we control ourselves, especially when our automatic habits get in the way of our goals. Think about when you want to study but your phone keeps buzzing, or you promise yourself you'll go to the gym but the couch calls louder. That inner tug-of-war is what cognitive control is all about. Scientists have studied this for ages, often using tasks where people have to respond quickly to something while ignoring distracting information. Usually, researchers measure how fast people respond and how accurate they are. But here is the thing that tells you the end result, not really what is happening during that crucial time between seeing a stimulus and actually reacting. This new research by Jacob Sellers and his team proposes a really cool way to look at this using something called a forced response method. They compare what they call congruent trials, where everything points to the same action, versus incongruent trials, where your automatic response might be different from the goal you are trying to achieve. Imagine an arrow pointing right, but it is surrounded by arrows pointing left. Your brain has to fight that instinct to go left and deliberately choose right. The problem with just looking at reaction time is that by the time you respond, your brain has likely already sorted out a lot of that conflict. You typically get really fast, right, most of the time. This makes it hard to see exactly how that internal battle plays out. That is where the forced response method comes in. Instead of letting people respond whenever they want, the researchers force them to respond at a specific time. They do this by varying when the stimulus appears. So you see the stimulus at different times, but you have to press a button at the exact same programmed time on every trial. This way, they can look at how accurate you are at different processing times, building what's called a speed. Accuracy trade-off function. It's like seeing snapshots of your brain's decision-making process at different stages. To make sense of all this data, they use a computational model called the response preparation model, or RPM. It suggests that when you see something, your brain starts preparing a habitual, automatic response and also a goal-directed response. These preparations happen at different speeds. Think of it like two trains leaving the station at slightly different times. One is your fast automatic train and the other is your slower, but more deliberate goal-oriented train. The RPM tries to figure out when each of these trains is likely to arrive at its destination. In their first set of experiments, they used this method with classic tasks like the flanker task and the Simon task. They found that the RPM could accurately predict people's behavior. What was really neat was seeing that on tasks that create conflict, people's accuracy at very short processing times was basically random, like flipping a coin. Then, as more time passed, accuracy for the easy congruent trials went up steadily. But for the tricky incongruent trials, accuracy actually dipped below chance for a while. This suggests that early on, people are making the wrong habitual choices before their goal-directed control kicks in. Next, they wanted to see if this model could tell them how cognitive control actually adjusts. You see, when a task gets harder or more demanding, we're supposed to get better at controlling our impulses. But does that mean we get better at blocking the bad stuff or better at focusing on the good stuff, or both? Using variations of their tasks designed to trigger different control adjustments, they discovered something significant. They found that something called the congruency sequence effect, which happens after you do an incorrect trial, tended to be explained by changes in how the goal-directed response was prepared. Basically, after making a mistake, your brain speeds up its goal-oriented response. But for something called the proportion congruency effect, which happens when the task is mostly one type or the other, they found it was better explained by changes in the habitual response preparation. This means your brain slows down its automatic habitual tendencies when the overall task demands it. This is huge. It shows that different situations might engage different control mechanisms, and the RPM can help us see which one is being adjusted. Now, a big question is whether these findings from the forced response method are just a lab curiosity, or if they actually relate to how we behave in everyday situations, which usually involve free response times. So, they had people do both a forced response version and a free response version of the same task. They then used the parameters they got from modeling the forced response data and tried to predict the results from the free response data. And guess what? They found a significant correlation. The model's predictions based on the forced response data could reasonably predict how people behaved in the free response task. This is super important because it suggests that the force response method isn't faking us out. The underlying cognitive processes seem to be the same. Before we get too excited, scientists always want to make sure their models are reliable. A key part of that is parameter recovery. It is like if you create a recipe and then try to bake the cake, and then you try to figure out the exact amounts of ingredients from the finished cake. If you can accurately get back to the original ingredients, your recipe is likely good. They simulated data using the RPM with known parameter values. Then they fitted the RPM to that simulated data to see if it could recover the original numbers. They found that for most of the parameters, the model did a really good job, even excellent, at getting back to the original values. This tells us that the numbers we get from fitting the RPM to real people's behavior are likely meaningful and not just random guesses. Now, the researchers wanted to compare their RPM to other popular models used to explain cognitive control, specifically evidence accumulation models like the diffusion model for conflict tasks or DMC. These models also tried to explain how we make decisions over time. They simulated data using the DMC model and then tried to fit their RPM to that simulated data. The big question was, do the parameters in the two models mean the same thing? Do they capture the same underlying cognitive processes? The answer was surprising. Not really. They found a striking lack of correspondence. The parameters that one model used to explain, say automatic processing, didn't cleanly map onto the parameters in the other model that were supposed to explain the same thing. This is a really important finding. It suggests that different models might be making different assumptions about how cognitive control works, and this could lead to different conclusions about what's happening in our brains. Given that the DMC struggled to fully capture the nuances of the forced response data compared to the RPM, they suggest the RPM might be a better fit for this type of chronometric data. So what is the big takeaway from all of this? This research has shown that by using a forced response method and the response preparation model, we can get a much clearer picture of the dynamic interplay between our automatic habits and our goal-directed intentions. We've learned that we can see the actual time course of conflict resolution. We've seen how different situations might lead to changes in our goal-directed versus habitual processing. And critically, we've seen that this time-based analysis can predict our everyday behavior and that our modeling framework is robust. The ability to tease apart habit versus goal-directed processing is really powerful. It means future research can pinpoint precisely how things like stress, fatigue, or even rewards might be affecting our ability to control ourselves. The researchers also point out that combining this modeling approach with brain imaging techniques could be incredibly insightful. Imagine seeing what's happening in the brain at those specific moments when habitual and goal-directed processes are competing. While this study offers a fantastic new window into cognitive control, it is important to remember it is just one piece of the puzzle. They mainly used arrow tasks, and the exact way habits and goals interact might change depending on the specific task and how we're supposed to respond. But the biggest strength here is the methodology. By forcing a response, they can see what happens before we reach our typical highly accurate response. This truly opens up the black box of cognitive control. It suggests that to truly understand how we make decisions, especially when our impulses are pulling us in different directions, we need to look at the timing, the dynamic unfolding of these internal processes. It's not just about whether we get it right or wrong, but how and when we get there. So, what do you think about these findings? Does this help explain why it's sometimes so hard to stick to your goals? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this breakdown helpful, give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more science explained, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.